But to start out, how the GOP became the party of tax cheats, which is the title of my piece today over at HartmannReport.com. Yesterday, I don't know if you caught this, but yesterday MAGA Mike gave a press conference. And, I believe I mentioned this yesterday, the billionaires really got their guy. I mean, he was flawless. He was slick and slimy and unctuous and hypocritical. And, for example, every dollar that the federal government gives to the IRS produces between $3 and $12 in revenue returned to the U.S. Treasury. Every dollar produces as much as $12. As $12 is when you audit the returns of the top 0.01%. $6 when you audit the return of the top 0.1%, 0.01%. $3 when you audit the returns of the 0.1%. So, it's an investment. It's not an expense. But MAGA Mike wants to, send $14 billion to Israel and cut $14 billion from the Internal Revenue Service's budget. And in fact, that legislation passed the House yesterday. It's going to die in the Senate. Chuck Schumer's going to have nothing to do with it. How's MAGA Mike going to deal with reality? I don't know. We'll see. But what was interesting to me was during his press conference when he was laying all this stuff out, and he used the phrase fiscal responsibility about a dozen times, or a whole bunch of times anyway. Not one single reporter pointed out to him that every dollar you give to the IRS produces as much as $12 in revenue for the government. Nobody pointed that out. Why? Because no reporter wants to be banned from the press room. No reporter wants to be blacklisted. No reporter wants to be on the Republican bleep list. And so, they just don't ask tough questions. This is what happens when your media is based on infotainment. It's based on, how much advertising can you sell? How many eyeballs can you get? So anyhow, he repeated that over and over again. So it raises the question, when and how did the GOP become the party of tax cheats? In that regard, I think it's important to look at a quick history. When Republican Dwight Eisenhower was sworn in as president in 1953, the top income tax bracket for the morbidly rich was 92%. Republican President Eisenhower was just fine with that. He knew that it discouraged wealthy people from strip mining their businesses for every penny they could find at the expense of their employees. Instead, employers paid workers well and rolled corporate profits into R&D to develop new products. It made America the world's leader in innovation. In 1946, at the end of World War II, our national debt was 119% of our nation's GDP, much like today's 123%. Truman and Eisenhower, though, knew how to reduce that debt. High taxes on billionaires and massive expenditures on American infrastructure like schools, hospitals, highways, and airports that stimulate the economy. In fact, in just the 7 short years leading from Truman's presidency or the end of World War II to Ike's inauguration, they had cut our debt down to 68% of GDP. Jack Kennedy kept those high taxes for morbidly rich people in place on every dollar over $400,000 a year, which is $4 million in today's money. People paid 91 cents in income taxes on every dollar. And true to form, the economy was rip-roaring along. The middle class was growing faster than anywhere else in the world, and our debt was under control at 54% of GDP. After Kennedy's assassination, Lyndon Johnson gave a tax cut to the morbidly rich in exchange for their going along with Medicare and Medicaid, with the Great Society. He cut the top rate to 70%, but he kind of, pulled a switcheroo on them. He did get the Republicans to say, okay, we'll go along with this if you'll give us a tax cut, drop it down to 70%. But then he closed so many loopholes that revenue to the federal government actually went up. Richard Nixon, Republican President Richard Nixon, was also fine with a 70% tax bracket on the morbidly rich. By the time he left the White House in 1974, our national debt was down to 31% of GDP. And it stayed there through Carter's presidency. It went up 1 point to 32% from 1977 to 1981. And then it happened. During Jimmy Carter's presidency, 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court legalized, for the first time in the history of either America or any other developed country in the world, legalized political bribery by both billionaires and corporations. It was a subset of Lewis Powell's infamous Powell memo about how the very, very rich should rise up and seize control of American politics because they know best how to run the country. And Powell suggested all those pesky social programs in the New Deal and Great Society had put America on the road to communism. Powell himself wrote the 1978 decision in First National Bank versus Bellotti that legalized political bribery by giant corporations. Reagan was sworn in on January 20th then. That was 78. 3 years later, Reagan gets sworn in on January 20th, 1981, and immediately sets about making the Republican Party's top priority not what's best for America, which is pretty much what Eisenhower wanted, and arguably even what Nixon wanted. Keep in mind, Nixon signed the EPA into law. But Reagan said, no. We're going to start exclusively serving the interests of very rich people, of the morbidly rich. Period. Full stop. That moment, January 20, 1981, as Reagan raised his hand, raised one hand to take the oath, put the other hand on the Bible, and the Ayatollahs released the hostages that they had held on to for over a year, 444 days, to screw Jimmy Carter. That was the moment when everything in America changed, and changed for the next 40 plus years. Reagan set a pattern that would become a recurring theme for the Republican Party: abandon American values and even betray our allies if it means wealth and political power. I mean, look at what the Republicans are trying to do right now to Ukraine. George W. Bush, cynically exploiting 9/11, lied us into 2 unnecessary and illegal wars just to save Dick Cheney's company and ensure his own 2004 reelection. Donald Trump enthusiastically accepted help from Vladimir Putin to win the White House in 2016, and his family has now taken over $3 billion from Middle Eastern potentates. Also, Reagan embraced Jude Wanniski's 2 Santa Claus theory. That was published in the Wall Street Journal in 1977 when he argued that Wanniski argued that when Republicans held the White House, they should spend like crazy and cut taxes. And when Democrats took the White House, Republicans should yell and scream and squeal loudly about the national debt that the Republicans had run up. I think people are starting to figure it out. But anyhow, so here we are. Cue smarmy Mike Johnson. He was so on message yesterday. He even claimed that people in the military had told him that the national debt is a bigger threat to America than Russia or China. Nothing is more important than cutting back on the IRS's ability to audit billionaires while reducing social program spending to get our national debt under control. I mean, the sad reality is that the Republican Party only serves 2 masters: giant corporate monopolies and the morbidly rich. I mean, they'll toss a rhetorical bone to racists, misogynists, gun freaks, homophobes, and Nazis, but that's just to get enough votes to hold political power. Their real obsession, their true North Star, is great wealth. I'm telling you, there were Democrats a couple of days ago who were absolutely giddy when Mike Johnson was elected Speaker of the House. I was not among them. I get it. I've worked in the media since I was 16 years old. I owned and ran 2 ad agencies. I used to teach advertising and marketing back in the 80s. I get it that it is the presentation that is typically more important than the content. If you make incredible content boring, nobody's going to pay attention to it. If you make mediocre or even dangerous content exciting, people are going to take it seriously. This is what Reagan and Bush and Trump knew, and were very, very good at. Now his latest thing, this just came out yesterday, Mike Johnson is collaborating with Republicans in the United States Senate to come up with a bicameral, bipartisan piece of legislation that will establish a cat food commission, a commission to figure out how to cut Social Security and Medicare. And, if they pull it together, and I'm guessing they probably will, my prediction is that they're going to suggest that we raise the retirement age from 67 up to 70, that we fully privatize Medicare. We say, hey, more than half of Americans are on Medicare Advantage. That's a vote. That means people don't want Medicare anymore. And they'll just end Medicare and say, okay, the entire program is now called Medicare Advantage. I mean, they pretty much said that's what they intend to do.